do we need a living city? Why do we need the buzz and the movement, the diversity and constant development, a city that is never sleeping? What would happen if we would design our cities out of practicality or out of political aspirations instead of human needs? What would life look like?
The word living or alive or full of life is a big part of many projects. And as an architect, that is usually what we aim for. And the role that we take is to make that happen. You need to look at all the different parts. What is happening outside your project or the outside of this area? We need to understand all these different flows and function to really understand what our project will do for this part of the city, and we can make that area alive. I would definitely say that I live in a living city, and I also see the need and the longing for a living city today. I think we as human beings want to see the buzz and the movements and people around us, even though we're not interacting. It can just be enough to watching it from the inside of your apartment or your office. There's a lot of kind of constructed places where you have developed something from the idea of a perfect place or the perfect modeled or shaped architecture, but it can end up being a really empty or vast place that is more for a function than the need of humans. You can also feel this when there's the scale of the architecture gets too big and you as a person can feel really small and that you're only like a small detail in a bigger environment and it's not made for you. It's very rare today that you plan a whole city from scratch. It rarely happens that you have that opportunity. And if that would occur, I think you would need to ask these questions from a point of view where we are today. I don't think that you can look too much into tradition or into history and say what worked and what didn't work. But we know that planning a city from like a perfect grid and separating all the functions within the city has proven not to be a good example, but rather having a city evolve by time. We also see that greenery is a big part of making a city living and alive today. The concrete jungles are rarely as living as we want them to be. If you think about a city from a functional point of view, you would find ways to move the traffic. You could place the business district in this zone, maybe placing the industrial district over here, away from where people will live, and you would place the housing district over here. Perhaps the commercial parts of the city. And you would fill out with some green parks. What happens here when you do this type of grid structure from a city is that you are separating all the functions from each other, and you're not creating any natural meeting places for the people moving in the city. You're looking at the city from a top view perspective, planning it in a perfect way and the best intent in mind. Le Corbusier, the French-Swiss architect, he made a master plan in the 1930s that he called the Ville Radieuse, or the Radiant City. And this was kind of the way that he planned that type of city, finding a zoning system based on a grid system and really trying to think about all the perfect ways of planning a city. The problem is still that you don't have any natural meeting places for the people living here, and you lost the human scale. You can compare that to a city that has developed in a more natural and more organic way. You can still use the grid system, but you need to mix the functions up. Put some commercial parts here, some housing here, finding natural ways for you to move, letting all the small imperfections be seen as a natural part of the landscape. And that is what we believe makes living cities. When planning a city, you can have different perspectives. You can choose to look at the city from a macro level, really having an overview of the whole of the city. But when you're talking about a living city or a living block or a living district, you need to zoom in, working with a smaller human scale. We need to look at the needs of the people that will work here, live here, go to school here, and ask ourselves what would they need to feel that this is a place they want to visit and thrive in. We design and see the city as a palette of the things that are incorporated. And it's not only the function, but it's also the experience for the people visiting that you have to have in mind. For example, filling up the buildings with cafes, bars, shops, all the cultural aspects of a city, all the mix of everything make up the city and makes it interesting and a place where you want to live. I believe that most cities have like specific areas or districts or neighborhoods that you absolutely love, and that would vary from person to person. There's some cities that, from my perspective, is really good example of living cities. For example, Copenhagen, where everyone is biking around. I think that is just lovely. We have Amsterdam. I think Stockholm is a good example as well. And then, of course, we have Berlin, New York, Paris, all the big cities that you just love to visit and travel. A living city is like an organism built up of all the components and all the different parts, making it interesting and alive. It's the little details, the imperfections, it's the big buildings and the huge scale in contrast to the small coffee shop on the corner. I think a living city is a city that has evolved during time. So you have the old facades, the history and the development of the city itself, and adding to that new and modern functions of the human needs today. The mix and contrast of all that together makes up a living city.
What makes a city inside City Skylines feel alive? When does your city pass the Feels Right test? Comment below and share your thoughts. In the next episode, we will explore the city as a canvas, how materials, colors, and sounds can change the way we experience cities throughout the world.